crypto truly matures, users will not know what L1 they're on, and they won't even know a lot of the time if they're using MarginFi, because that'll also be abstracted away to this, consumer grade application front end. However, since crypto is so small right now, you need to be super sensitive to like motives of an L1 appealing to the immediate users, because if you can't appeal to the immediate users, you'll never get a chance to appeal to the future users.
This episode is brought to you by Jito. Jito is the easiest way to earn MEV rewards on Solana with liquid staking. Stake your SOL with Jito to start earning high yield powered by MEV, and access instant liquidity through Jito's liquid staking token, Jito SOL, so that you can use your staked assets across Solana's DeFi ecosystem. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lightspeed. Today we have a special one. It's a DeFi Solana panel. We've got Lucas from Jito, Jarry from Ellipsis Lab, and MacBrennan from Margin Labs. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure being here.
All right, let's get right into it. So I'm gonna just call out people's names before answering or asking questions. But first, what's going on in DeFi, MacBrennan?
Yeah, so a few things. I think you're seeing this explosion in TVL first. We just raised, for context, like the one of the protocols I contribute to, MarginFi, just raised caps 2 days ago, and within like a second raised like 3.5 million was poured into that, hitting like new supply caps existing in the first place because of like a variety of risk constraints in terms of that supply turning into borrows and the capacity to liquidate that safely. And so I think actually Lucas said this, where for a while now, Solana has gone through this period of, and I hate drawing these analogies, but there's like the 2017 ICO hype in Ethereum, and then 2018 DeFi products like really started maturing and picking up steam. I think that's kind of played out, a similar scenario has played out with Solana, where Solana was a new technology. Some teams came in, like there was this like opportunistic period, and then all throughout that period, there was teams like Jito, teams like Ellipsis, teams like Zeta, Camino, Drift, Cypher, Zeta, etc., that were building during that time, and they're all hitting inflection points with the product right now. And the three variables have been there. Like liquidity has been there. Users have been there. Users are constantly, from a daily active user standpoint, rivaling Ethereum, Polygon, Binance, etc., exceeding that. Liquidity is there. There's currently 7 billion staked to validators on chain, priced in Solana, essentially waiting for like higher rates and more opportunities to pursue on chain. And the dev ecosystem has been there. The teams I just mentioned, the teams on this call, and so people were just waiting, and liquidity was waiting for like the right opportunities at the right time, and that's what's happening in real time right now. Is the right teams are here, the right opportunities are here, and there's this bottleneck of liquidity that's like broadly just blocked by risk. And this is not just like on our front. This is like something we're working with Jito, I know, and it's really just like a move of working iteratively on the risk front to intake as much supply as possible, as fast as possible, and doing that in a safe way. And so that's the explosion we're seeing right now, and that's like something I'm very excited about.
Yeah, Lucas, we've seen really the same thing with Jito SOL. I think it was in June, you're at 650,000 SOL staked, and now it's over 1 million. So you're having this hyper growth. Like, what do you attribute to that?
So I guess in the last like month, we've seen the protocol grow like 50% or more. I think a lot of that is due to this like narrative around Solana DeFi coming back. There's a lot of protocols like MarginFi and like Mango and Meteora and other places that are kind of popping up that really kind of go like hand in hand with liquid staking tokens. And I think that, sure, you can hold a liquid staking token by itself, and that's great, but the true utility comes from using it in these DeFi platforms. And we're starting to see these platforms get a lot more adoption, and things like Cypher points, MarginFi points, and some of these point systems are really driving a lot of growth to Solana DeFi. And then, the liquid staking tokens go hand in hand with that. So that is growing pretty fast as well.
So would it be fair to attribute a good amount of the growth so far to this new point stuff that have been, developed by Margin, Cypher, and the composability across DeFi?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of it that's driven by that. And I think more broadly, like we're seeing platforms like Meteora start to pick up, and, I think they somewhat announced their token plan or their token revamp. So we're seeing like more TVL and liquidity go there. And I think the points have contributed a lot. And there's kind of this like wave of new DeFi protocols coming, or these like new users that are coming on chain, and this liquidity that is really kind of snowballing and having like a pretty wide blast radius in a good way.
Mm-hmm. So points actually, it seems maybe they're kind of a controversial topic on the Bird app. I've seen various takes for it, against it. Jarry, OX Shit Trader Eugene, your co-founder, tweeted this the other day. Points are just a way for teams to defer airdrop. It's isomorphic to issuing locked tokens. The advantages are to the team. Token has no mark price, can't be dumped, can arbitrarily change scaling, no transparency. Variance in pursued valuation is exploited, etc, etc. For your first question is a very loaded one, but what do you think about that?
I think my co-founder has a lot of very opinionated takes on Twitter. I oftentimes agree with a lot of them. And I think that there's clearly some nuance to this point. I think point systems in general, the whole purpose, to me, it seems like you want to bootstrap this activity, but you also care about these second order and also long-term effects. And I think that's pretty important to consider, especially when it comes to general airdrops across a lot of DeFi protocols, where you have this measure of you have this carrot that you're dangling in front of the user. It's you use our product, and then you get this carrot usually being a token, and then once the token gets launched, it becomes liquid, and someone is going to want to buy that carrot from you. And I think that it's a model that has proven to really boost short-term growth, often at the expense of long-term sustainability, where you see these charts that kind of look up and down, right? Where someone tries to immediately, I don't know, in the beginning you farm this airdrop, and afterwards the users kind of taper off over time. Maybe this is an okay way to do some growth hacking. I do kind of believe in the long-term vision of DeFi, where this thing kind of is able to operate by itself without these token incentives, because ultimately what should be the driver of product is product itself, not token. And too much we see in DeFi and in crypto that the token ends up becoming the product. And I think that in order for this ecosystem, in order for this industry to become something that gets ingrained in the long term, we have to sort of move away from that. I do think that growth hacking as a way to bootstrap users is not a bad strategy, but I do think in the much longer term, what we should be striving towards is building products that are sustainable.
Yeah. MacBrennan, I'd love to get your take on this. I think you started with points July 3rd, and you went from 3 million in TVL to 17 million. I know TVL is not everything in DeFi, and that's something we'll probably want to talk about later, but maybe talk about your experience, what you think about points, and how's it gone from March and Buy so far?
Yeah, so I think one important thing about points is or tokens in general, is that having a token is unequivocally game theory optimal. And if you're building an open source protocol and you have the same liquidity in users versus another open source protocol with the same liquidity in users, the one with a token is going to win 10 out of 10 times. So having a token is sort of a necessity if you're building something open source. If you're building something closed source, then it's not. Then you can have some proprietary code base, but that's sort of counter to the broader DeFi movement that we see, which is anchored on transparency and trust, and a lot of that is validating what's going on in the code base. So given that instance, MarginFi is an open source protocol, right? And so someone could theoretically, I dare them to try to fork it, get the same users, get the same activity, and then get to that same point that we're at And then if they were to launch a token and we did not have one, they would have a serious advantage over us by default. So what we're doing live is we're testing, okay, if we did have a token live right now, how could we effectively ingrain that into our product, into our protocol? What incentives work? What incentives don't work? What user archetype does this attract? What user archetype does this not attract? Where can we find distribution for this flywheel? Where can't we? And points are like the highest leverage way to do that. This is actually something and this is like a big team-wide push. This isn't anything, any sort of individual accomplishment, but I'm very excited about like pioneering points on the DeFi front. I think like points have really only been tried out in 2 formats previously, to the best of my knowledge. They've been tried out on Blur NFT marketplace on Ethereum, and then Tensor on Solana quickly followed with a similar like setup. Within DeFi, it's like kind of like this blank slate of like, how can we figure out how points work here? And like for a team like Jito, for instance, they're so multifaceted, right? They have the Jito Soul LST. They have, certain like considerations around MEV searching. They have considerations around like validators. And so, you can go right to a token and launch it and hope it works. But you could also like, across those stakeholders for Jito, for example, they could just test a bunch of incentive mechanisms and make them sustainable first in the lead up to a token, so that when they drop the token, it becomes this like sustainable flywheel that they're looking for, and that they can, again, remain open source. They can have this competitive advantage. That's what we're working towards with MarginFi. And I think just that simple innovation, not any sort of, because like there's no sort of contingencies attached to this point. Just that simple innovation is why, users are resonating with us so much. And that's I think where we've seen this explosive growth come from.
Lucas, why do you think we haven't seen more tokens from Solana DeFi specifically?
I think that it makes sense for protocols to hit a certain amount of usage before they launch a token. I think you want to, like to what Jarry said earlier, like having a token isn't like a business model. You want to make sure you have like product market fit and there are people using what you're building. And so I think there's that. There's obviously a lot of like legal red tape that you have to go through to launch a token. And I think that it's pretty expensive and time consuming to do that. I think that like going back to what Mac was saying about points, I think they're interesting growth hacking. I think we've seen a lot of teams that have like really messed up the initial token distribution, where they overinflate it, or they there's like Sibblers, like people buying Lamborghinis from the Arbitrum airdrop from like Sibling. So we've seen like this massive like incorrect allocation of tokens when these protocols go live. And I think the points are kind of like a worthless, like, the points themselves are worthless, but it's kind of an interesting way to experiment in the way that like where do you dangle your carrot, and how big and juicy is that carrot? And like, if it's not doing what you want, can you like tweak it, or can you like move it around? Or maybe, I think kind of like trying to experiment with the behavior of people is like pretty important before you have a token, because you want to make sure that the token is like you have like data and kind of these experiments that you can run and look back on and say, hey, like this worked well, this didn't. Where do we need to like juice this a little more and all that?
Yeah, so Solana, a lot of the projects were known for not having tokens. Now you do have incentives and you have these points. Like, what is Solana DeFi missing? Lucas, you said that Solana Summer or DeFi Summer is confirmed. Like, what do we need? What do we need? Like, is it LST growth is so important because that needs to be throughout DeFi, or what do you guys think? Like, what's missing to take over that next hump?
I mean, I think like more LST growth is always awesome. There's a lot of protocols that can use LSTs. The thing that we're running into with margin fi is that there's actually not enough liquidity on chain. So I think people that are like minting these LSTs, maybe they can do like 50 LST in Sol and put that into like an AMM or something to provide liquidity. I think stronger like primitives, more capital efficient primitives like Phoenix. And then I think also like there's probably going to be more projects launching tokens coming like later this year or very early next year. And I think that will be pretty important. I think like L1s are kind of useless if there's not like a ecosystem of tokens that are like native to that blockchain. It's kind of like tokens aren't a business, but you can think of them like a business or something, and like a reason for someone to visit the city, where the city is like the L1. And if Ethereum didn't have any DeFi or any tokens, it'd be kind of useless. So I think like more tokens on Solana will definitely help.
So Lucas, you just alluded to kind of capital efficiency and mentioned Phoenix, which is an order book. Jarry, you're obviously building Phoenix. I saw that you had a really cool analogy comparing kind of center limit order books with like a physics twist. Can you maybe talk to us about, why should people care about order books over AMMs? How do you think about the differences? Obviously, there's a lot of hot takes on, do you take AMMs? Do people even care about order books? Order books are obviously something that Solana first brought to the scene with Serum. Can you just talk just a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, I can go for hours on this topic. It can get pretty deep. I think the high level idea, right, is that markets are this kind of system that operate dynamically, and they don't really have these rules necessarily. It's just kind of like where supply meets demand. And generally, when you have a system like this where some people want to buy and some people want to sell, you sort of like, the market kind of ends up becoming the middleman to connect these two people. And the people who facilitate this this connection are the market makers. So you have someone who's willing to buy and sell at the same time, and they get to set the terms. I think this is how almost all traditional markets work. You have trillions of dollars moving through centralized exchanges like stock exchanges every single day. And that's a system that's really beautiful because you have these people who are like these strict zero-sum actors who are not really looking out for anyone. They're not trying to make the world a better place. They're just trying to make money for themselves. But as a consequence of this, you have this like deep liquidity that exists in the real world, where at any given point in time, you have this portfolio of stocks that you can liquidate and you can speculate on. And that's all facilitated by the fact that this liquidity exists unincentivized due to this mechanism of people getting to dictate what prices should be and what prices they're willing to trade on. This is what an order book really enables. It gives you the ability to be precise about the price levels and sizes you're willing to specify for each order. And the difference with an AMM, the primary difference, is that the AMM gets to set those terms for you as a liquidity provider. So you kind of have to be proactive in telling the AMM to not do something, versus on an order book, you get to be proactive in saying, this is what I want to do. It's kind of like having an assistant to do actions for you. And sometimes those actions are things that you just never want to do in the first place. And so you need to like explicitly have the finger on the red button to say like, hey, this is bad, let's not do that. Like a sandwich is a perfect example of something like this, where a real life market maker would never let themselves get sandwiched. A sandwich attack, to those who are not familiar, is when some uninformed actor makes a really large buy against an AMM. That buy offsets the price of the AMM to a price that's like outside of the range of where the true value should be. And the AMM immediately is willing to buy it back at a price slightly lower because they originally sold, now they're buying back at a much higher price. And a real market maker would never let this happen, because what they would effectively do is warehouse the risk, because they realize that they sold the asset at a price that was a lot higher than it was worth, and they're not willing to buy it back at a very low price or like at a price close to their sell price. They realize that they made a really good trade. And they're not going to immediately sort of like get out of the trade because they're afraid of the risk. They realize that this risk is worth the amount of edge that they received. And that's kind of just like one caveat there, where like this AMM is doing these things on behalf of the trader that the trader wouldn't do themselves. And order books kind of allow them to set their terms on the kinds of trades they're willing to make and the kinds of orders they're willing to place.
Does this make a big difference for everyday users? For example, let's say somebody's just getting into DeFi. How should they think about, hey, do I go on Ethereum and maybe use Uniswap if I want to play with this DeFi thing, or do I go on Solana and use order books?
Yeah, so the kind of beautiful thing here is it doesn't make a difference at all. This is kind of just like an interface, right? The interface for the normal user is like you place trade, and then the trade goes through. You don't really care where it came from. That's why Jupiter is so powerful. You make a trade on Jupiter, it routes to wherever the best price is. That could be an AMM like Orca or Iridium. That could be an order book like Phoenix or OpenBook. But it doesn't matter to the user. They don't care where the end state is. The reason why I think order books are powerful is because like they have a proven track record of allowing their LPs to be profitable. The people who provide liquidity are on there because they're making money, not because they're being like tricked that they're making money. I'm not going to go on this like spiel on how like AMMs are like super unprofitable. I think they're just like negative EV. And I think that oftentimes people don't understand the nuances there of like why such a strategy potentially isn't like always going to print you money. Turns out that money doesn't grow on trees. Turns out there's no free lunch, and like perpetual motion doesn't exist. It's kind of the nature of how markets work. Order books are this thing where they have been this proven mechanism where you can provide liquidity and be profitable. And that I think is like kind of powerful. And for DeFi to succeed in the long term, I think that this is something that has to be addressed, because ultimately over time, you can't have unsustainable models govern the way that liquidity operates on chain.
So CLOBS require professional investors, to some extent active investors like you're talking about, and deep liquidity for it to really be useful. How do you picture Solana's brand? Because I feel like at first, Anatoly came out saying it's NASDAQ on chain. And right now you have a lot of people in the ecosystem saying it's a consumer chain, or like that's where consumer applications are going to take off. NFTs have really taken off. So how do you see that balance? Because for Solana DeFi to work with how it's built today and to take advantages of Solana's high throughput, you need professional investors in DeFi. But it seems like a lot of other builders in the ecosystem are basically saying this is going to be a consumer application chain with NFTs almost being the dominant aspect. MacBrennan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think especially when you're looking at usage through like the lens of like usage when it's attributed to products with huge financial overhang, if you will, you need to be super adaptive to where we are in like at the stage of the cycle, and Solana has been that. And so what I mean by that is like V1 of MarginFi was like we were the first team to provide universal margin across derivatives on different dexes for any traders. So for what that means is you could set up a delta neutral position between like Drift and Mango, for example, and your margin would be managed through, you'd have universal liquidity, a universal interface, universal risk. Your margin would be managed appropriately. That product didn't even have a front end. That was like only dealt with sophisticated algorithmic traders. It dealt with like small prop shops in like Asia, for example. And that's because we were at a stage in the cycle where rates on chain were super high. There's a lot of opportunity capture, and it made sense for these guys to come in. You know, we're in a different stage of the market cycle, if you will, right now. We're in a stage where those same guys really aren't active on chain. They're partly active off chain on like centralized exchanges, but they're also just like largely dormant. And so the big user archetype right now is retail, just basically like you and me, like people just using the chain for like commercial use cases, or for just like normal user facing use cases. And so NFTs are a big part of that. And so Solana's just been like super adaptive to that. And a lot of teams have been super adaptive to that. Like Tensor has been super adaptive to that. And when you have a product that's like sort of dominated by this stage we're at in the cycle, you also have to be adaptive to that. So what did we do? We went over collateralized. We built out a front end. You know, we're one of our strongest user archetypes right now is people coming to MarginFi with USDC, borrowing Solana against that, and going and trading NFTs with that, so that they can hold USDC exposure, but have tactical Solana to just like go after an NFT trading opportunity. And so everyone like kind of needs to understand this. This is one of the different things I think about building a DeFi product versus building like a consumer product. is with a consumer product, you sort of like pick a target market and you're like, okay, I'm going to go after like this user archetype in this market. And market cycles, where interest rates are really don't like change what you're doing. But when you're building like an order book on chain, you're building infrastructure on MEV, you're building a borrow lend, you have to be like very sensitive to where are interest rates, like what's going on like the finance space. And that's just exactly like what's happened at scale on Solana. So as rates go up, as opportunities go up, DeFi is going to play a big part of that because it's going to be like very front and center. The broader push, I think, is like ingraining crypto more and more into the real world so that these fluctuation periods can like even out a little bit. And we can find more like predictability in our product building. But that's like, I think like the TLDR there is why building a DeFi is a bit different.
So obviously order books are more capital efficient than AMMs. And this has led to some discussions about TVL. TVL is this really interesting metric that some people use as the end all be all. Some people think it's useless. Some people think it might be useful. What are some good stats to really understand how DeFi is performing and how a chain is performing, Lucas? And actually, also, what are your thoughts on TVL as well?
Probably, I think high TVL is good. I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh, capital efficiency is more important and all this stuff. And yeah, I agree there. But I think as far as like a trust signal goes, I think TVL is pretty good. Or it's a one potential trust signal. Like, you look at some of these other alt L1s that no one has ever used and the TVL is high and you're like maybe questioning it or something. But if you look at like Arbitrum or these like blue chip L1, L2s with high TVL, it's I think when you see that, you're like, okay, this is actually like pretty legit. And so yeah, I think high TVL is good. I think, but also like in the case of like if you're providing liquidity, you really care about the capital efficiency that's going on in the protocol. So like, I'll let kind of Jarry speak more to this, but like capital efficiency on Phoenix is like it's way more efficient than Uniswap or I guess like any AMM.
I agree with Lucas that like high TVL in general is like a good trust signal. So I'm not like anti high TVL in any way. I think there's a lot of like benefits of having high TVL, namely like you have this like value secured in the chain where like if your TVL is higher, then like it does sort of imply that there is more value to secure. And so there's like benefits there. Another thing about TVLs is kind of reflexive in a way, in like a big way, where like the price of the token, like the L1 token, is a huge determinant in like what the like TVL of the chain is. So like when Sol went from like $18 to $28 and the TVL of Solana chain went up, that that really shouldn't be that surprising, right? Because a lot of the assets on chain are like actually just Sol. And so in that sense that there's like a little bit of like misdirection there, right? It's like, yeah, the TVL did go up, but like, did you check the prices? So I think that all of that is like, it's like obviously important in the sense where you have like this like trust in the chain, like people are trusting the chain to custody assets, and that is valuable. And that sort of allows other people to be more interested in what's going on. With respect to capital efficiency, I think that it probably matters a good deal for traders, where if you are trying to do something on chain, I think providing liquidity is a really good example. You don't want to be like super capital constrained. You don't want to put down a lot of capital in this and like use it ineffectively, because that effectively is capital you can use somewhere else. Phoenix is, I'd say, like relatively capital efficient. Obviously, like this thing is a pretty tricky subject, and there's like many different ways that you can look at it. And like I'm not going to say that like volume over TVL is like the world's greatest metric, but it is something that kind of approximates it. Where Phoenix regularly does like $5 million of volume in the Sol USDC market with less than $100,000 in the book. And I think that like this is something that you can't really do on an AMM. Like I think maybe you could, but it's probably pretty difficult to accomplish this while your LPs are still like steadily profitable. We've run all of the markouts on the people who provide liquidity on Phoenix and those numbers look pretty good. For those unaware, markouts are like this pretty standard metric in traditional finance to measure performance of market making strategies. And usually when this graph looks up and to the right, it means that in general, you're making trades that are usually collecting positive edge, which means that over the long term, if you view all price movement as just pure variance, the strategy itself should be profitable. And so when we look at those numbers on Phoenix, we see that the market makers are consistently profitable. This is not true when you look at the numbers on Uniswap. It's not true when you look at the numbers on other AMMs on chain. And so that sort of indicates that having this system where you're able to not only trade with high levels of capital efficiency, but also like dynamically dictate where your prices are moving, has some benefits to the person who's trading.
Jarry, I think you were talking about, is that the same metric as DeFi velocity, which Ben Springo talks about, where you have like TVL divided by volume over like a 24 hours, 7-day trailing period?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a weird metric. It's obviously not perfect. There's a lot of ways it's not perfect. Like, I'll give you an example where like volume over TVL is not a perfect metric. Like, suppose you have someone who's placed a bid for Sol at like $1, and in that bid there's like $1 million, right? So this particular order is never going to get executed on, but the TVL is like a lot higher, right? So effectively, that's an example of like capital not being used efficiently. If you have like a lot of volume near the top of the book, so like close to where the fair value is, and there's a lot of volume that's been done, that generally indicates that like the capital is being used more effectively. Basically, that capital is being transacted with. And so, yeah, I think it's not a perfect metric, but it's one that I think that like it does sort of like highlight some of the differences between an order book and an AMM, where I don't really think it's all that possible for an AMM to generate metrics that look similar to this.
Let's just assume we are, just a crypto enjoyer, right? And we just want to mess around in DeFi. Maybe we don't know what chain we're going to pick. What metrics do you look at to distinguish between protocols? Like, it's not TVL. You can't look at that alone. You can't look at volume alone. What are some easy to grok numbers you can look at as just a regular Joe to, assess this is a good protocol, this is better than this protocol and this metric, et cetera, et cetera? Up to the floor. Anybody can answer this.
I want to call out one thing here that Solana can definitely improve on. Also, like a quick thing with volume and AMMs that Jarry also didn't mention is like how much volume on AMMs is just simply rebalancing and like arbitrageurs coming back in and correcting prices, which you also don't have on an order book. So like volume on an AMM is just going to be by default severely inflated. But so it's just another reason, like volume as well is a great metric and then also not a great metric. But one thing I do really appreciate is like on GMX, for example, there on Arbitrum, there are these like massive trades that like there's a $16 million trade like every day, for example. And so massive trades like that, where there's like the appropriate liquidity depth to handle that trade, and it can be executed at a good price. And you kind of get that experience. You can place these fat trades that you could also like make on like OKX, for example, or Coinbase. Bringing more of that to Solana is like an area I think we should all like collectively work on. A big part of that is like having the liquidity on chain in the first place to field that. So that also like goes back to what Lucas was saying previously, where sometimes TVL is a good metric because like having that liquidity there is important. That's something that I would really love to see, because that means that we're not only building these tools that are very efficient and very easy to use and like great for users, but they're scaling to our TradFi counterparts, if you will, and they're more practical for bigger players, especially in a world of finance that's dominated by bigger players. That's like a metric I'm always like watching for, because and it's important for a variety of reasons, but like as a user, just like where can I place like really big trades and not be like get a great price for it? I think that's something we should all work on.
Quick break to tell you about our sponsor, Jito. Jito's been known for building Solana's top MEV software, and now Jito is the fastest growing liquid staking protocol in Solana. Solana DeFi is heating up, and there's no better asset to use in DeFi than liquid staking tokens. That's why you should check out Jito's liquid staking token called Jito Sol. With Jito Sol, you can start using your staked Sol throughout Solana DeFi while earning MEV and staking rewards at the same time. And Jito has made staking extremely easy. You can start earning rewards and receive instant liquidity all within 3 clicks by visiting jito.network/staking. If only all of DeFi was this easy. Jito is perfect for whales who need deep liquidity and also people who are new to staking. Because not only does Jito make staking simple, they make it secure. Jito has 7 audits. They're one of the most respected teams in Solana DeFi, and they have over 1 million Sol staked. Just go to Jito's website, start testing out their staking product, and go use your stake Sol throughout Solana DeFi. Jito is one of my favorite teams in crypto, and they have one of the best products in Solana. If you're not liquid staking, you have to go check it out. Go visit jito.network/staking. That's jito.network/staking. Go get started. I put a link in the show notes. Everyone, we'll get back to the show in a minute, but I want to let you know that we got our Permissionless conference coming up. This is our conference with Bankless. That's the biggest and best conference in DeFi. It's going to be in Austin, Texas this year. Yep, I know you love it. They got tacos, barbecue, Barton Springs. Got it all. September 11th through the 13th. If you've been in crypto for a while, you know that the bear market conferences are the best conferences because those are the ones where all the alphas had. The people that are still in crypto all really want to be there. It's going to be great for building a network, for learning a lot. And look, we've got a phenomenal lineup of speakers that include people like Hasu, Stani, Christine Moy, and Kyle Samani. Talking about ZK Tech, rollups, account abstraction, MEV, app chains, and more. Look, I'm damn excited. Because you're a listener of Lightspeed, you're going to get a special discount. Type in discount code Lightspeed30 and you'll get 30% off your ticket. That's right. Just type in Lightspeed30 when buying a permissionless ticket and get 30% off. Click the link at the bottom of this episode and go get it now because prices are going up every 2 weeks. All right, back to the show.
Going back to your question on like, what do you look for as a user that doesn't really know DeFi that well? I think understanding I think risk is very important, and understanding the risk involved with what you're doing. I think that's like the most important thing, and that will kind of lead you to other things to look into. But is this program audited? Are the risks like clearly stated somewhere? Does it rely on an oracle? When you bring an oracle into the system, the risk changes a lot. And are they open source audited? Things like that. I've seen a lot of users get lose a lot of money in crypto, unfortunately. So I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is to like understand what you're actually putting your money into.
So while on that topic, I recognize this when I first started in crypto, at least, is like, and my brother actually asked me about this, say like, yo, should I ape this? And it's basically like you see these pools and they say like things like 655% APR or something like that, or like, 5,000% yield. Let's assume there's people that are new to DeFi watching this. How should they think about those claims? I'll give this one to you, Jarry.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't something I've seen a lot, and usually it irritates me a lot because I know kind of like where these numbers come from and like why they're kind of baity. And so generally how this happens for like AMMs is that you have these like, at least in the early stages, you have these emissions from this like token that is sort of like airdropped to you as a consequence of like providing liquidity to a pool in addition to the fees. And you kind of take the amount of fees generated in a single day plus the amount of emissions collected in a single day. And then you multiply that by 365 to kind of give you like this really, really appealing massive number where without ever accounting for things like loss due to price movement. And then similarly, I think like options protocols will that sell like covered options will sort of quote you the risk premia of selling an option without like indicating what happens in the case that like say your collateral kind of like moves down in price, or if you get exercised on the option, right? So these are like things that kind of get hidden away from the user when you have these like high level numbers. So I guess I would just say that there's like no free lunch, where like if you see a number that seems too high, like if the number has like more than 2 digits, it probably isn't like something's being hidden from you. If it has 3 digits, something is definitely hidden from you. If it has 4 digits, I think you should just run. Because like usually what ends up happening is that you like probably can like make a little bit of money in the early stages by collecting these emissions, but as time goes on, like that's going to dry up, and then eventually, I guess if you're, especially if you're LPing into one of these like shitcoin pools, like you could just end up losing everything, because the natural flow of things is when people start dumping, like you're going to be left holding this bag. And so yeah, I just think that like these numbers are incredibly misleading, and they should definitely be like viewed with a skeptical eye if you see something that looks like this. The things that are usually like more transparent are things like, I would say like staking yield is like generally pretty transparent, where you kind of know where that comes from. But things that like, oh, you deposit it into this random black box and it gives you some % yield, that's a little bit sketchier. Or like you do some on-chain options protocol, that's usually like they're hiding some information from you. I think like borrow lend pools are generally pretty reasonable about this, because like there is like an actual interest being paid for the capital being provided. But yeah, in general, I'd say that like be cognizant of the fact that usually if the number looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true.
It's a good warning for everybody. I'm curious, what do you think is next for Solana DeFi? And I know it's in the earlier stages in Ethereum. One thing you're seeing with Ethereum DeFi, though, is a lot of the apps are vertically doing vertical integration. So you have like Aave with Go, you have Frax doing stake Frax, and you have the stablecoin, and then you also have the exchange. Do you see that happening in Solana? And I think one other trend is real world assets. And is that something that you think is going to happen in DeFi? Like, what do you think is coming next?
I think we'll probably see more teams do some type of vertical integrations. I think it makes sense. Obviously, you want to balance. You need to be careful in the way that you message it and all of that stuff, to avoid alienating other projects that you, when you vertically integrate, you might compete with. But I think it's inevitable as like projects look to like direct more fees towards the treasury. I think the thing that I'm looking forward to is more liquid staking adoption on Solana. I think we're gonna see that ramp up a lot here, and people like minting LSTs and using them in like stable swaps and borrow lend and stuff like that. I think less than 2% of all stake SOL is in liquid staking, where on Ethereum that number is like much higher. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we've seen that drive a lot of growth to. We've seen the growth in liquid staking on Ethereum grow into other things like other protocols drive the TVL there, and you kind of get this like reinforcing like feedback loop from that. So definitely looking forward to that.
I definitely agree on the liquid staking point in particular. There's a lot of value to be there's a lot of asymmetry there with how Solana is positioned in terms of DeFi protocols being positioned for that, to intake that. Lucas also knows, like we've already kicked off some vertical integration plans ourselves. I'm very excited about, like, there's teams building on MarginFi now, and sort of, not just the team itself, like building new products on top of the liquidity foundations they've built, but outside teams coming in and now using these like trusted primitives to build complementary solutions. That's where I think, especially just on like the retail adoption side, people get very excited, and Solana definitely needs to level up to that. That's something that EVM has had a time to get to and to mature to, and Solana still really hasn't. And so like, that's a broader trend as well I want to call out. I think would be super exciting.
So while we're on the topic of EVM, I know you guys probably saw this coming, but how should people think about building DeFi on Solana versus L2s and maybe some EVM-centric solutions? I actually want everybody to answer this. So Jarry, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that's most interesting about Solana is like how much the design space grows given the execution and programming model. Like there's so many things that you can potentially do on Solana that you just are unable to do on Ethereum. even unable to sustainably do on an L2, because I think right now the fees are probably too high. I think there is an EIP that's like coming up that maybe might change things like that. But at least in the current day and age, Solana enables unique innovation. And I think that's like kind of the thing that I'd like to see more of. So kind of like really utilizing the capabilities of the chain to do something that like would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do elsewhere, and really leveraging composability. I'll give you an example that isn't my protocol, which is Jupiter. I think Jupiter is like by far the best aggregator in all of crypto. And I think one of the major reasons why it's able to be so effective is it sort of like really pushes this Solana programming model to like basically the boundaries. Like it's doing things that like I think most other protocols aren't thinking about doing. And as a result, you get this like really impressive thing where right now, like I can't tell you with like I can't honestly tell you the best place to swap on chain is to go to Phoenix. I'm going to tell you that the best place to swap on chain is to go to Jupiter, because that is like where you're going to find the best prices. And the way that they're able to do that is via composability, and it is via like this unique set of programming paradigms that Solana introduces. And so I would say that like to try to like build DeFi for the future, you should really kind of understand what the technology has to offer and leverage all of those things to build a protocol that is innovative and differentiated and something that's not possible to do on another chain.
Well put. Mac?
Yeah. I mean, everyone gives a quick answer that Solana is fast and cheap here, but like Solana is fast and cheap. That actually opens up a lot of things as well. Apart from like what Jarry was saying, I think we're still like the only team in crypto to provide universal margin between derivatives on different dexes. And that's because like we can, from a risk management perspective, derivatives are fast moving products. And so like from a liquidation capacity perspective, we have the ability to liquidate faster and cheaper and safer on Solana than you would on a chain where gas prices are shooting up, where like the chain is throttled, et cetera, et cetera. There's a reason like these things are important for finance. And so, but yeah, very much to Jarry's point, like that's something that really is only possible on Solana, truly. And that was like a 10x experience for anyone like sophisticated trading across markets. And so like we very much, like we're going to continue to emulate. We actually have two products that are like very close to completion now that we've been working on that are going to be tightly integrated with the margin 5-bar lend. And there's going to be a lot of things that are only possible in Solana, these 10x products improvements, simply because like on the foundation that Solana is fast and cheap to use. And like I'm very excited to like launch those and know that there's really nothing someone on EVM could do to compete with that because of just the foundation that they're on. So yeah, I'm just calling out the basics here since Jay had a more eloquent answer, but like, yeah, fast and cheap enables like some really interesting use cases.
We've talked about like the composability and stuff like that, and I think those are all good points. I think also like fast, cheap, that's obviously true. I think it changes the way that you can think about protocols, and like one thing that I've always been thinking about is like more automation and like more rebalancing and things like that. Like can't really do like for instance, if you're trying to like rebalance or something on Ethereum, it's gonna be like anywhere from like $5 to $100 depending on the usage. On Solana, a rebalance is like 1/100th of a penny, so you can just do way more and have more automation involved in your protocols. So I think pretty excited about that. I think Ethereum like EVM will focus. They make you spend a lot of time like gas golfing, which is basically trying to optimize your EVM code to make it, maybe use certain EVM instructions that are cheaper or use different like storage types and things like that to make it cheaper. And you can kind of see it when you read through some of these Solidity programs. It's like, what the hell is going on in here? And like, so yeah, you depending on what you're doing, like I would say that is like the the default in Solana is not gas golfing. Like, you don't really have to worry about that. It's super cheap. You have plenty of compute. But when you do have to worry about it if you're starting to compose on a lot of these things. You have to start worry about the like transaction size, how many accounts you're locking, and things like that. So there's definitely trade-offs there, but I think like not gas golfing, not having to worry about that is pretty great because everything's just so cheap and fast.
Hot take: automation is also potentially very relevant for AI and like the infusion of AI in crypto for like these automated programs to run, which is like also something we've always been thinking about. But if you think about that like very hot trend right now, I think that's also very complementary to what Lucas just said.
MacBrennan, how do you feel about the future? What customers are going to think when they think of an app? Are they going to think about Solana first? They're going to think about MarginFi first. And if it's MarginFi first, that's the brand and that's like the user touch point. Would you look at something like the SVM when it's expanding on something like CLOBS? Do you look at other high throughput chains? I know Eugene tweeted the other day, similar to I think Sunny tweeted about Cosmos ecosystem, is that they need to come up with basically game changing products in the next 12 months. Or Ethereum is going to catch up to them. I'm just curious how you feel about that and how you like relate MarginFi to the Solana brand.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many levels to this. Right now, you just think about L1s, and they think about protocols, and then that's about it. They should, in the future, like if crypto truly matures, users will not know what L1 they're on, and they won't even know a lot of the time if they're using MarginFi, because that'll also be abstracted away to this, consumer grade application front end. That is like the future of DeFi, where it's these financial rails and these infrastructure pieces are essentially competing on efficiency, which is why like Solana is like a really good foundation for that. And essentially they're open source, so anyone can compose on them and build on top of them. However, since crypto is so small right now, and it's really just like tiny. Crypto is like very much a new novel technology. You need to be super sensitive to the community specific, the community specific like motives of an L1, and infusing your protocol with that L1 and appealing to the immediate users. Because if you can't appeal to the immediate users, you'll never get a chance to appeal to the future users. And so it is important now to understand, the different like nuances between people who traditionally use like EVM and people who traditionally use Solana, and position yourself accordingly. However, we've failed as an industry if like 10 years from now, people are using an application, like using it because it's on Solana, and even really knowing what like borrow lend architecture and like MarginFi's case they're composing on, they're using on top of their like consumer grade application. That's sort of my like zoomed out and zoomed in thoughts on that.
So while we're on the topic of maybe the future of the industry, I want to maybe role play a little bit. So imagine I am just somebody who is, a big TradFi fan. I love my interest rates and my T-bills and just parking money and getting, yield from the government. Why should I use DeFi? Jarry?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think that like in some cases it might not even be like a thing that everyone needs to use, right? Like if you do kind of want to like use T-bills, like there's always going to probably be this like off-chain real world way that you can collect this yield. It's possible that in the future, like some of this stuff will be tokenized and put on chain, and that could be pretty interesting too. I imagine in that world, like it's probably not like a free permissionless system, but rather like a permission DeFi if you want to collect yields via like treasury bills or like bonds. But I think the thing that DeFi like makes DeFi powerful is you kind of have this like ability to sort of I think like I really think that the composability thing is the thing that's pretty cool, where like you can do things with existing infrastructure. Where like on Ethereum, I think that they've done a very good job of like composability. I think that's like one of the things that makes the EVM powerful is if you want to go like integrate with Uniswap, I think it's maybe like 10 lines of code and you're done. And then like now you have a protocol that can like auto swap into a UDV3 pool. I think that's pretty powerful. Like you basically have this like existing infrastructure that is extremely easy to work with and extremely easy to sort of like attach to a product that you're building. I think that like the answer to this, like who uses DeFi, like you need to have like products that use DeFi, right? I think real world assets makes a lot of sense here. Like one thing that I'm very interested in is this idea of like potentially moving Forex markets on chain in some capacity. Maybe it won't be like the whole set of all Forex is on chain, but like some piece of it might be. And so if you want to like participate in some of these like global remittance flows, like there's some common ones out there like US to Mexico, Dubai to India. Like these flows of capital are very natural and they're going to happen regardless of whether crypto exists or not. And if there exists the ability to sort of like off ramp via these crypto rails, that could be extremely interesting. Where now there's like this real world problem that gets solved by having crypto being this like middle layer. And like MacBrennan was saying, no one really needs to know. Like it's just this thing that they use in a consumer grade application where they interact with it. And then at the end of the day, there's some transaction that occurs. It might occur on the blockchain. We hope that it occurs on Solana, but this can hypothetically be like totally abstracted away. And I think that's kind of like what makes it powerful. Like you have this like programmable layer of composable programs that can transfer real world value. And if DeFi is going to take off in the future, it has to really capitalize on that.
There's been a tweet going around or a trend on Twitter, and it's like my controversial take in crypto is, and it's that guy with the swords like pointing towards him. What do you guys? I want to go and hear from each of you. What's your controversial take, whether that's about Solana, Ethereum, or just the ecosystem in general that you have that you think maybe most people don't agree with? And Lucas, if you're ready, start with you, or somebody can volunteer.
Oh man. I feel like that meme was funny because there was a lot of people like sharing takes that were actually like people thought they were controversial, but they're actually not, and like everyone agrees upon them.
100%.
But yeah, I guess mine is like I think probably for the next 10 or 15 years, the chain people will know what chain you're using, and that it will matter a lot. I just don't really see that being abstracted away anytime soon.
Agreed.
Wait, why do you think that? I'm interested.
I mean, I think like I think there's a lot of complexity and like the bridging and all these L2s and things like that. And I think that is going to be extremely hard to abstract from the user. And I just don't really see that happening anytime soon. I think there's also like a lot of tribalism from other communities, also within our own community, if we're just being honest with ourselves here. And I think that there's a good chance that crypto remains like pretty niche for the next few years. And I think that if it remains niche, then I think this like tribalism will continue and people will know what apps chains are on and will not use apps because they're on some chain that they like or don't like.
Nice. Hi, Brandon, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with Lucas. Like, it's a bit difficult. I saw a bit, I'll say two things. I saw a bit like, I'll say something that I think is more not contrarian, but that people like needs to be said is that if Solana doesn't continue to attract an increasing amount of liquidity, developers, and users, like it'll fail even if it has better underlying tech, because essentially it's still infrastructure. So let's never lose sight about like every team and user on Solana should be doing everything they can to attract more users, more developers, more liquidity, full stop. One thing that maybe is a bit more contrarian is like that I think when you're building in crypto, you need to very much like embody your, like you need to adopt the sort of like overlying crypto governance that exists, and if you're going to be successful, you need to like move independent of, the day-to-day of what is Gary Gensler saying today, or what is this government body saying today, et cetera, et cetera. I think teams are very, very overreactive to that. And ultimately, if we just conform to the same thing we've seen in traditional finance, we're really building undifferentiated technology and we're wasting our time. There's a reason for permissionlessness and decentralization, broadly speaking. So I don't know, maybe that was a bit too general, but I do think a lot of teams have been really happy to embrace this this infusion of TradFi and DeFi, and a lot of teams are trying to land that because they think it's a big golden egg. And I don't think that's the right approach. I think you need to build for crypto natives and embody that crypto governance first, and make people reactive to you, even though that's very hard to do in practice. It's a bit abstract.
Yeah, to hit on your first point really quick, when you're talking about why Solana might fail, what do you think would be the main reason that Solana does fail to get those users? Is it products? Because it does seem right now that Solana might be in the best position to build the best, cheapest, highest performance products.
Yeah.
Or do you think it comes down to storytelling? And I see you get involved quite a bit on Twitter and going back and forth with some people in Ethereum, and it seems like they do really have good storytelling and community. And Solana is something that's building from that. What do you think the main failure would be?
Yeah, it's all a distribution game at the end of the day. And so Solana right now, and this is a lot with Ethereum, but not as much. And this is where Ethereum has some strengths. Solana is, broadly speaking, a blockchain for Americans by Americans, extending that to also Canadians and just Westerners in general. If you go over to Asia, you go over to Singapore or South Korea, ecosystems like Tron and Binance and Luna, when Luna was a thing, are have massive distribution, and we have not. There's half the world is over there. So appealing to that market is existential, I think, to Solana. And so we need to break outside our own bubbles as Westerners, generally speaking. Everyone here is definitely based on the Western side of the world. I think, at least. So that's one thing that we need to make a broader push on. And when that happens, then teams come in and compose on top of the existing primitives. That's step 2, because again, we're still Ellipsis is building an order book. Jito is building critical MEV validator infrastructure. We're building a borrow lend. These are primitives. These aren't products on top of primitives. So we need to make that step as soon as possible. That's where you start to see compounded value, TVL adoption, etc., and you see a more complex financial system breakout. So those things in order, capture distribution, bring people in, and then build on top of what's here.
Yeah, and Jerry, what do you got? What's your controversial take?
Yeah, I think I have 2 that are actually maybe kind of controversial. So the first one is I think that Solana developers need to, I guess, focus more on traditional crypto values of being open and decentralized. Source code is still oftentimes closed. And I don't think you have to necessarily go full open source with the right license and everything, but your code should be public. People should care about verification too. If you have some source code that is publicly available, but I can't confirm that this code compiles down to the exact thing that you uploaded on chain, you can have a hidden rug function in there, right? It's table stakes for Ethereum to do this, and it's ridiculous to me that teams in Solana don't treat this as a priority number 1. This should be the status quo, and it shouldn't be this thing that is sort of an afterthought. That's the first one. The second one is I think that decentralized leverage is an oxymoron, where if you have a protocol that offers leverage, ultimately somewhere down the line, there's going to be some centralized piece of the system. And that could be an Oracle. I think you'd argue that an Oracle is there are decentralized aspects to it, but ultimately this price is coming from somewhere, and that's a dependency that you do have very little control over, and it can also potentially be manipulated. And you also have these risk parameters and levers that realistically aren't going to be static. Like, I think it's very difficult to sort of like come up with a system where you have these like hard-coded parameters, and it's going to be like forever, like these are the parameters that are going to be the things that govern the way that risk is managed. Like, it doesn't seem very likely. This is not how like the real world works, like real finance works. Generally speaking, you have these like situations where you have people make discretionary decisions to sort of protect solvency. And so I think that like it's a very noble and difficult problem to try to solve. But I think fundamentally, no matter what happens with like these things that have some version of on-chain leverage, there's going to be some element of centralization, whether we like it or not.
Jarry, why don't we have this culture of open source and publishing ideas on Solana? What do you think is the root cause?
Yeah, so I think it's like probably two reasons. So one is like the DevX is kind of hard, and so like I think that like once it becomes difficult to do this, like that initial activation energy to try to like get it to work is like not super, like it's hard to find, and like the goal is that you want to ship quickly, right? So I can't really fault the devs for not doing this, because like if it's so hard to do, and like your goal isn't to like, oh, let's try to be practical, let's try to be like super idealistic here and make sure that everything's like verifiable and open. Let's try to get the product out the door. Like, I get that. I've been there. This is like really what should be on your mind. And like, if the DevX is tricky, I understand why some teams might not be like super willing to do it. I don't think that excuses the open source aspect, but it definitely excuses the verifiability aspect. And I guess the other is that like, there's not like this shame culture out there, right? Like, and I hate to call it that, but it's like, I think that once you see teams out there that aren't like willing to reveal source, and you feel kind of defensive of it yourself. And like, I think that this should be something that changes, where like maybe the status quo should be like, if you have a program that's out on mainnet, like you should have public source code like attached to it. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with building in the close. Like, I think that's totally fine. I have no issue with that. I think the main thing is that like when you have this thing on chain, like that thing should map one-to-one with some piece of software that you can like read line by line. And realistically, like not many people are going to do it, and that's fine. Like, it's not like I'm going to go meticulously go read through every single line of code that someone else wrote for this on-chain program. I think a big part of it is that like you have the optionality too. And I think that's something that like the Solana ecosystem should really focus a lot more on.
So what you're saying is we need to bully protocols more that are closed source.
I think like bullying, but like lightly bullying. Like it shouldn't be like oh like totally shitting on them for not doing this, but it should be like, hey, like it would be really great to, and like it should kind of be like not an afterthought, right? It should be like, this is a thing that you kind of go in with the expectation that like by the time you're on mainnet, you're also public source code. Like that's I think how things should work in an ideal world.
Yeah. There's also something interesting there where like if you have like inertia where your TVL keeps growing, the likelihood and like the pain if you open source something later is going to be much worse if you if there's like an exploit or something. So the earlier you do it, and the less TVL you have, then there's like less friction and like worry to open source. But
Yeah,
you know, if you have like $5 billion on a closed source protocol and you open source it, then that is going to be a very stressful time in your life.
Definitely. But that's not to say that like closed source is necessarily like that much safer. Like you can definitely still exploit closed source protocols. It's not like impossible. There are like wizards out there who can like read the bytecode and like understand like vulnerabilities in there. Like you're not going to be protected forever. But ultimately I do think it does send like a better signal out there where like, I think just like from the perspective of like someone who like probably uses Ethereum a good amount, they probably aren't comfortable using a protocol that doesn't have like verified code in Etherscan. And hopefully Solana can get there. I think it's like probably soon, but I think that's like a really, really important thing for the ecosystem to kind of like understand and really like take into heart when they go launch new products.
While we're on the topic of bullying, I do like doing a rapid fire section at the end just to get some spicy takes. So just for context, I just make these questions up on the fly. I do not just whatever I think of. And I'll just ask a question and then you guys can kind of go Jarry, Mac, and then Lucas in order. All right. Should programs on Solana be frozen?
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
No.
Can you expand?
Yeah, like, you gotta explain. I don't even think he heard the question. He just said no.
I think for certain protocols, it can make sense to not freeze them as long as they are under the control of a multi-sig, and it's a multi-sig that is like well distributed. And I think as long as the community knows about it, I think that is okay. I think there's probably a point in time where it does, I guess I would say overall it doesn't make sense to freeze them, but I think there's a point in time where it does make sense to freeze them, and that is probably based on like TVL and other risk factors that I would have to think about more.
I do think that having time locks is something that like we should be doing a little bit more research into, where like if you do need to make a program upgrade, at the very least, it's behind a time lock where it won't execute for X number of days. And then when it gets in, like everyone can kind of get a sense of like what the changes actually are. Like there's source code associated with the change that's being pushed, and people can kind of like look through it and understand like what are the actual changes being made to the code, just for like transparency's sake. I'm not going to say this is perfect. There's downsides. Like if you're trying to hotfix a bug, like this is obviously like potentially really scary, where now you have like this race against the black hats, where the black hats have like 2 days to exploit the contract. And so that's kind of scary. But I do think it is good for transparency versus like hot updates.
Cool. USDC, is USDC okay to use, or should we aim for decentralized algo coins?
I think USDC is a great product. I think that if you're like using a stable coin, like I think you kind of have to be okay with this like level of centralization. I do think that like decentralized stablecoins all kind of have some sort of like gotcha associated with it. Like with DAI, I think it's a pretty reasonable idea, but over collateralization is not the most capital efficient. I don't think something like the idea with UXD, or the idea that Arthur Hayes posts where you're like selling derivative to delta neutral hedge your position, I don't think this works on chain. We saw that like when UXD was live, they were just paying ridiculous funding rates of Mango, because turns out that if you're the only seller in the market, like the funding rates are going to move in the direction against you. And so I think this is like fundamentally really hard to do. I think it's a pretty clever idea, but I ultimately think that the way that stablecoins should operate is like you probably need to be backed by something, and you probably need to be backed by the actual asset that you're trying to track.
Okay, so my answer is no. I think if the USDC to peg actually happened when we had that massive scare, Solana's ecosystem would have been decimated. Solana is completely reliant on USDC as a token pairing for everything. Completely reliant, and there's really no, like Jay mentioned, UXD. There's no decentralized stable alternative right now.
UXD?
So UXD is wrapped USDC at this point, so it's the same problem with DAI. So funny enough, we will be announcing a decentralized stablecoin at margin that's collateralized by LSTs like Jito Sol. So it's truly decentralized. It will not be collateralized by USDC, and you'll be able to lend into margin fi and mint a stablecoin against that collateralized by LSTs. I think the ecosystem will, like, this is a must-have for Solana from a treasury management standpoint, from a portfolio risk standpoint. If you're holding a big bag of value on Solana and it's just in USDC, you have risk to circle. And so an alternative is extremely important. Yeah, we're working on that. It's getting close.
Is that the first time this has been public?
It went, so we have a margin telegram where they were spoon-fed this, I think like yesterday.
Nice.
But yeah, this is definitely alpha for everyone. So it'll be MUSD, decentralized stablecoin, and it'll be one of the highest yielding stablecoins for individual minters available on chain, because you're going to be capturing staking yield, MEV capture, like with Jito, for example, and lending yield, which will be like very competitive, and it'll be truly decentralized. So if USDC depegs, Maker will not also depeg. Like just as Maker also depeg, this stablecoin will not also depeg.
Nice. I'm fired up. Wasn't expecting that. Nice. Lucas?
Alpha. I think USDC is fine for retail. I think it's a good onboarding mechanism, but I think seeing more things like MUSD would also be great.
What is the worst DeFi take you've ever seen?
I think that's that LPs are like printing money is probably the worst one I've seen. Or like, I think especially the worst one I've seen is that like when you get arbitraged over and over and over again, you are profitable.
Fair enough.
I've just seen so much stupidity. I can't even narrow it down to one thing right now. I'm really struggling with this question. I'll shill Phoenix and say like the APYs that you see on AMMs are like straight up criminal. They're not even just like misinformed. They're like bad actors that are trying to use retail liquidity as their dumping grounds. So there you go. If people say something even slightly alternative to that, it's a bad take.
Lucas.
The worst DeFi take I've seen?
Yeah, ever. Just
Oh, good.
you just saw and you were like,
I
what
saw
the
you
hell
doing
is
some
going on
research
here?
over there.
Or just MEV actually, just to tailor it for you.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time coming up with something.
Okay.
I'm gonna pass this one.
Mert, I'm
That we
still-
can get rid of MEV, right?
Oh
The
yeah,
people
there
that
you
say
go.
We're building.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Mert, I'm still
Yeah,
in the
you-
next
you-
question.
Okay.
I'm coming in. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Jerry, let's start with you. All right. You have to build on either Cosmos App Chain or an L2, and you want it to be the most successful product from both user adoption and value over the next 5 years. What are you building?
That's a really, really good question. Gun to my head, I would probably say L2 right now, just because I think you have some composability benefits where like Cosmos, you kind of have to build this ecosystem entirely from scratch. One of the reasons why we built on Solana instead of like another chain is because you don't have necessarily like this like ecosystem bootstrap problem where if you're building from like total absolutely nothing, you need to like get all the liquidity into your chain. I think like with L2s, at the very least, like there is like a relatively acceptable path to do this. Or if you build on an existing L2, there's like a path to do this where there's like liquidity on Arbitrum, there's liquidity on Optimism. I think there's like building liquidity on ZK Sync. So that problem is less of something that you have to surmount. And additionally, like you actually do get composability, which is pretty nice. Whereas like IPC via like different Cosmos chains is kind of this thing that I think is not super great for a user experience. And it's harder to tap into other people's products.
Nice.
Yeah, if you need composability, you should use an L2. If you don't, you should use an L1. If you're a first-time founder, you should use an L2 because you're going to have like liquidity advantages and like more helping you out. If you're an experienced founder and think you can do your own thing, like DYDX, yeah, go to an app chain. That's a great thing.
For most founders, I would say L2 just because of the composability and like simplicity and like tooling out there. But you know, if you have a very specialized use case like DYDX or something where you have like these order books, then something more like a fast L1 or a custom app chain that can like address those needs makes sense. But I think for the most part, I would say an L2.
Cool. Okay. Two final ones, quick. NFTs, yay or nay?
In the current state, I'd say nay. I think they have potential. I think they have a lot of potential, but I don't really think this profile picture craze is really it. Like hopefully down the line, like if this new technology takes off and is usable, there has to be some like real world like things that you can do with them. And I don't think we've seen this yet. And I only think that we've seen rampant speculation.
Generally, yes, and in many ways, I'm not even qualified to answer on this question, but But I think Art Blocks is super cool. I think the original like CryptoPunks PFPs is super cool and has its space. And I agree with Jerry that I really would love to see evolving use cases with NFTs. So if it stays in PFP forever, then no, because it's just like it just shows a stale industry. Yeah,
I'm gonna say yay, just because I did well on Bored Ape Yacht Club. But I think, yeah, yay. There's a good driver for like people to like visit Solana and start to like dip into their toes. I think also like 2 yays for X NFTs because I think it's actually a like extremely novel use case of NFTs.
A little bit of shilling on that. We just had Armani on, so if you haven't listened to our first episode, check it out.
Okay, final question. Let's end on a wholesome note. You guys are all founders here. What is one piece of advice you'd give to aspiring founders, existing founders?
Well, that's a really good one. One thing I'd say is that like a lot of times the hard problems that you're solving is not really going to be the tech. Like a bunch of your time is spent thinking about strategy. A bunch of your time is thinking about like hiring. Like being a founder is like extremely stressful, but also really rewarding. And I guess like the piece of advice is not really advice, but just kind of like a statement is that like what you think is going to be challenging is probably not what's actually going to be challenging.
Yep. I would just say send it, go as fast as possible, surround yourself with people who are way more brilliant and smarter than you are, way more accomplished than you are. And if you do those 3 things, you're off on a good foot. And if you don't, you'll probably fail. And you'll probably fail anyway. So send it.
Yeah. I feel like I could go on for a while about this. I feel like I've learned so much. I think you want to find a good co-founder that will push you and hold you accountable, someone to bounce ideas off of. I think I was telling someone this earlier, but I think a past CEO told me that like the hardest part about building a company isn't knowing what to build or like how to build it, but it's like what order do you do it in, and make sure that you're focusing on the most important thing at that time and not wasting your time. And then, yeah, I think you just have to like what Max said, I think you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and continue to like accelerate and push yourself and like push your team as well. And yeah, you just gotta keep accelerating.
Amazing. All right, guys, I think we can wrap this up. I do want to bookmark this. I know we haven't agreed on all the right metrics, but I'm just going to say today, Solana has 312 million in TVL. The stablecoin market cap's 1.5 billion. And the volume over the last 7 days is 781 million. So I would love to do this episode, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is down the line, come back, look at these numbers and see how the projects are doing. So everybody, we'll put links in the show notes to all their projects. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate being here.
Yep. We'll see you next time.